Okay, this is part 2 of the review of statistics using Excel. What we're going to do next is create a histogram, and we're going to create a histogram for the tuition and fees data. So there are many different ways of doing this in Excel. None of them are really wonderful, but I want to show you one good way of creating a pretty good histogram out of Excel. So you want to highlight the numbers in tuition and fees, not the title this time, just the numbers. And then once you have those highlighted, go up to the top menu here and click Insert. And what we're going to insert is something called a pivot table. So go over to the far left here and click on Pivot Table. Now, we're going to have a box that says create a pivot table. We're going to put it in a new worksheet. So everything on here is fine. We're just going to say OK. And we've now got a new worksheet that has the pivot table. In order to get the pivot table to work, we are going to look at the field box over here on the right-hand side, and we're going to select the box next to tuition and fees, and then we're going to drag that down into the rows box down here. Okay, so now it's basically giving us all the tuition and fees numbers again. Okay, now in the values box, instead of the sum, we want to click the drop-down menu here and change it, under the values. We want to click on the drop-down menu and pick, the thing called value field setting. Yeah, there's one more step here that I was forgetting. Okay, click on value field setting and then change it from sum to say count. Okay, click on OK. And what we're seeing is now all the values for tuition sorted from smallest to biggest, and each of them has a count of 1 in this case. Now, if there was more than one with the same value, you'd see a count that showed a different number. Okay, so choose the first number here, the first row, and what we're going to do is group this data. And the way you do that is choose this first one and then right-click on the mouse, and you'll see that there's a choice down here called Group. So click on Group, and what we want to do is, in this case, group our data in a way that is going to make sense for the histogram. So we don't want to start at 23,103 and finish at 45,921 and go up by 1,000. We want to group the data so that we have nice categories for our histogram. So we're going to start at a nice round number that is lower than the lowest value that we have in our data. And the lowest value is 23,103. So let's start at 20,000. That's a nice round number, less than 21,303. We want to pick an ending number that is bigger than the biggest number here and is also a nice round number. And so let's pick 50,000. And we want to go up by a nice round number as well. The number that we pick as our class width, which is what this by is referring to here, should be so that the class width, or that the starting number and the ending number are both multiples of the class width. So in this case, if we want to go from 20,000 to 50,000, it might make sense to go up by a class width of 5,000. So you want to make sure that you've got some class width that includes values in all of the categories here, and is a nice round number that will give you the right number of categories, but not too many and not too few. Sometimes it'll require some experimentation and playing around with different possibilities to see what the best way is to group the data. There's no perfect right or wrong answer to this. Okay, so we'll click OK. And what it's done is it's created a frequency diagram for us. This is showing us the various categories, and then it's showing us the count or the frequency in each of those categories. Okay. Now notice that when we load through the row labels here, the way that I picked it, every single one of these categories has at least one value in it. There's nothing missing. You need to watch for this, because if there's something missing, Excel is going to create a histogram that does not look right. It might like leave out one of these entire classes, and we don't want to do that. So make sure that there's no missing values in there in the row labels. Okay, Now, what we want to do is highlight all of this grouped data and counts like this. And then we want to insert up here a pivot chart. Okay, so if you insert, there you see it in the middle here. Sorry, it took me a second to find it. Pivot chart. Okay, now the pivot chart that we want to do for a histogram is this one that's the default, which is the clustered column. Okay, so it doesn't look quite like a histogram yet, but we'll make it look like a histogram. So click on the clustered column or choose that one. It should be defaulted for you, and then click OK. And it will put it here in the middle of the screen for you. What you can do is then pull it in the corner down here like this to make it a little bit bigger. And so this is starting to look kind of like a histogram. But remember, in histograms, the bars are supposed to actually touch each other. So how do we get that to work? So pick any one of the bars, it doesn't matter which one, and right-click on your mouse, and you'll see something called Format Data Series down at the bottom. Click on that, and it brings up a menu over here on the side. One of the choices is something called Gap Width. So we want to take the gap width bar here and slide it down and make it 0. And you see when you do that, it gets rid of the gaps between the bars. Let's close this down with this little X, and now we've got something that looks more like a histogram. The only thing we want to do next is to just make it a little bit cleaner. So instead of calling this total, we don't want to call it total. So let's call it tuition and fees, and then we'll put that it's in dollars, and we can call it a histogram. Okay, you don't necessarily need to put the word histogram in there, but it's okay. All right, now we've got it titled correctly. But what we want to do also is to put a axis along here on the vertical axis that explains that this is actually called a frequency. So how do we do that? Go up to the design menu choice up here at the top, and we want to add a chart element. And the chart element that we want to add is called the axis title, and it's the primary vertical axis title that we want to add. So it calls it as a default axis title. So we want to change that to say frequency. Okay. Now, we don't need this little thing that says total over here on the side, so we can highlight that and click delete with the right mouse button. Excuse me. And now we've got the tuition and fees histogram with the frequency on the y-axis and the various tuition and fees categories along the x-axis. Okay, now at the bottom here, you notice that it created a new worksheet for us. It called it Sheet 1. The data over here is still in the data worksheet. Well, instead of calling it Sheet 1, let's call it histogram. So the way you do that is you double click down here on this title and just type in the word histogram. All right, that's how you do a histogram. I'm going to pause the video here and create a new one for the next topic.